Do you really know what it meant to be in the Colosseum of Rome? We're not talking about a tourist visit. We're talking about actually being there, under the hot sun, surrounded by tens of thousands of voices, the smell of sweat, dust, and anticipation in the air, and in front of you, an arena where men could become legends or die forgotten. But why did the Romans love this bloody ritual so much? What made ordinary citizens, powerful senators, and even emperors stop everything to watch men fight to the death? The Colosseum wasn't just a stadium. It was a stage for power. There, Rome showed the world who was in charge. Every raised sword, every drop of blood, every roar from the crowd, everything was part of a carefully choreographed performance. And the most impressive part, few people today truly understand what really happened inside. Throughout this video, we'll travel back in time and take you inside the Colosseum. Not as a tourist, but as a legitimate spectator of the Roman Empire. By the end, you'll understand why the Romans worshipped these games. The Colosseum, originally called the Flavian Amphitheater, began construction in 72 AD by order of Emperor Vespasian. It was inaugurated just 8 years later by his son Titus, with a series of games that lasted 100 consecutive days. Imagine what it took to sustain a spectacle like that. The Colosseum had 4 levels, dozens of entrances, internal corridors, and a maze of underground tunnels. The engineering was so advanced that many modern scholars still wonder how the Romans managed to achieve it. It could hold between 50,000 to 80,000 people, a colossal stadium in the heart of the most powerful city on Earth. But the show began even before the combat. Tickets, called tesserae, were distributed for free. Yes, free. But don't be fooled. Nothing was random. Each citizen received their seat according to their social status. It was a silent code of hierarchy, and anyone who arrived there already knew what to expect. Senators and magistrates, they sat in the front rows right by the sand. Knights and wealthy plebeians filled the middle sections. Women, foreigners, and the enslaved went to the top. The very top, where the sun scorched your skin and dust stung your eyes. Even in entertainment, Rome reaffirmed its hierarchy. In the days leading up to the spectacles, the streets around the Colosseum turned into a storm of voices, colors, and smells. Vendors shouted, selling cheap wine and roasted meat. Children ran around. Musicians improvised. It was a party. It was Rome alive. Out there you could buy food, amulets, souvenirs, and even little toys inspired by favorite gladiators. For many, just being in that environment was enough to feel like they were part of something grand. When the gates closed and the crowd finally settled, the real spectacle began. But before the blood, there was ritual. The beginning of the games was marked by a solemn, almost sacred moment. The pompa, a majestic procession that crossed the arena like an imperial cortege. It was a symbolic act of power and sacrifice. Trumpets echoed through the stands, and then they appeared. Gladiators, prisoners of war, and even exotic beasts paraded under the crowd's hungry gaze. It was a meticulously choreographed show. Every step, every look, every movement, everything held meaning. When the gladiators reached the center of the arena, the entire Colosseum fell silent. Imagine tens of thousands of people in absolute silence, as if time had stopped. And then, with firm voices, the men about to risk their lives shouted in unison, "Hail, Emperor! Those who are about to die salute you." A spine-chilling phrase. It was in that moment the crowd understood. What was about to happen wasn't just a fight. It was a dance between life and death. The gladiator combats were the ultimate climax. They were duels choreographed with precision, but filled with real unpredictability. Each gladiator represented a style, a fighting school, a warlike persona. Among the most popular matchups were those between the retiarius, with his net and trident, agile, light, and precise, and the secutor with his heavy shield, smooth helmet, and short sword, brutal, solid, and relentless. It was like watching a snake face off against a bull, speed against strength, and the crowd roared with every move. A misstep triggered gasps, a perfect strike brought euphoria. The Colosseum pulsed with collective emotion, as if all of Rome were fighting through them. When a gladiator fell to the ground, exhausted, wounded, bleeding. The arena sank into a silence that seemed to tear through the sky. Everyone knew what came next. That man's fate now depended on a simple gesture, the thumb. All eyes turned to the emperor, and the crowd, like a hungry chorus, cried out for justice or revenge. A thumbs up and the life was spared. A thumbs down and the blood kept flowing. In that fraction of a second, the Colosseum became the most merciless courtroom on earth. But what happened when the gladiators withdrew? What filled the gaps when blood gave way to silence? Rome never let the tension drop. Not for a second. During the breaks between fights, the Colosseum didn't rest. On the contrary, that's when the spectacle became even more brutal and, at times, downright surreal. Enter the Venations, the legendary beast hunts. African lions, tigers from Asia, bears from the Balkans, crocodiles from the Nile. The entire wild world was brought to the heart of Rome. These animals were released into the arena, often in groups, before hunters armed with spears, nets, and clever traps. It was a mix of hunting and warfare, nature and civilization. The crowd watched, fascinated, as the empire clashed with the creatures it had conquered. But not every intermission carried an air of adventure. Sometimes the Colosseum descended into darkness. Those condemned to death, criminals, deserters, prisoners of war, were brought into the arena to be publicly executed. But Rome didn't execute just any way. Staged it. These deaths were often choreographed as mythological dramas, a spectacle that taught, through fear, what happened to those who defied the order. The crowd didn't just watch, it learned. But not everything was blood. On special occasions, the Colosseum was completely transformed. Through an advanced system of pipes and reservoirs, the Romans could flood the entire arena. The sandy floor disappeared. In its place, a massive pool took shape. It was time for the Naumachia, the staged naval battles. Real boats, real rowers, soldiers and actors reenacting ancient wars in the midst of the water. It was like watching a live movie. But with real risks, the audience watched in awe. Who else but Rome would be capable of flooding an entire stadium just to entertain its people? These games lasted for hours, sometimes entire days, but no one left. Because for the Romans, it was more than entertainment. It was a reminder of who they were. When the final battle ended, the still ecstatic crowd began to calm. But the show didn't end there. Right after the games concluded, the arenarii came into action. Those responsible for one of the hardest and quietest tasks of the day. Cleaning the arena, they collected the bodies of the dead gladiators, removed the remains of the slain animals, and covered the blood with fresh sand. It was a meticulous operation, carried out with efficiency. The space had to be ready for the next events, and the Colosseum didn't rest for long. While the sand still carried the scent of freshly spilled blood, the survivors were called, exhausted, covered in sweat, dust, and scars. The gladiators who had made it through the day were led to the imperial box, the highest point of the arena, where the emperor watched everything like a god on his mountain. That's where the official closing of the games took place. It was also the moment of consecration. Before tens of thousands of eyes, the emperor raised his hand and began to distribute the rewards of glory. Gold coins, laurel crowns, bracelets, applause. Gifts that, more than just objects, symbolized something greater: Rome's approval. But there was one reward that made any gladiator's heart beat faster. A chance that many pursued and almost none reached. Freedom. It was not granted easily. It came only to those who had fought with such undeniable bravery, with such admirable skill, that even senators were left speechless. When the emperor decided to grant it, the gesture was simple but the meaning immense. With a word, he transformed a slave into a free man, a warrior trained to die into a symbol of triumph. With the battles over, it was time to leave. Imagine 40, 50, even 80,000 people leaving a stadium at once. Chaos, right? Not in Rome. The Colosseum had 80 numbered entrances called vomitoria, passageways designed to vomit the crowd out in minutes. No shoving, no confusion. Every citizen knew exactly where to enter and exactly where to exit. It was as if even the evacuation was part of the spectacle. Rome worked, Always, even at the end. Outside, the atmosphere still felt festive. Local vendors waited for spectators with fresh bread, aromatic cheeses, red wine, and dried fruits. It was common for Romans to gather at nearby taverns after the games to talk about what they had just seen. In these circles, the fights took on new shapes. Every spectator had their favorite version. Every death was retold with added drama, and the names of the gladiators became momentary legends. These conversations kept the memory of the spectacle alive. They were part of the experience. After everything we've seen, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The games in the Colosseum were never just about entertainment. They were tools of control, and above all, a living reminder of what it meant to be Roman. There, between blood and applause, Rome exalted what it valued most: strength, discipline, order. Now I want to hear your thoughts. What impressed you the most about the Colosseum? If you could live just one day in the stands of that amphitheater, which moment would you choose? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. In the video on your screen now, we reveal what Roman gladiators actually ate.